Our scripture this morning comes from the beginning of Matthew. The angel said to Mary, "Do not be afraid, for you have found favor with God. And you will conceive and bear a son, and you will name him Jesus, which means salvation. And he will be called Great, the Son of the Most High. And of his house he will reign forever over the house of Jacob. Of his kingdom there shall be no end." And Mary said to the angel, "How will this be? For I am but a youth." And the angel said to her, "The Spirit will come upon you, and the power of the Most High will fill you. And you will be born, a child will be born who will be holy and called the Son of God. And your relative, Elizabeth, in her old age, is also now conceiving a son. This is the 6th month for her, and her friends said she was barren, for nothing is impossible with God." Mary heard all of this and responded, "Here I am, the servant of the Lord. Let it be with me according to your word." And then the angel departed from her. I titled this sermon, "Mary, One Tough Mother." It comes from a friend of mine, Michael Usey. He's a pastor down in North Carolina. He delights in being salty and pious at the same time. Members of his church did an outreach effort for the homeless in Greensboro, North Carolina, mostly with other secular organizations like the Rotary Club, the Lions Club, and of course various college fraternities and sororities. There they are down in the Bible Belt. And Michael wanted to distinguish his church from the other evangelical churches, which make up most of the churches in the South. So he made up T-shirts for his church members who volunteered that day. And the T-shirts said on the front, "Non-asshole Christians," right? You know what he's talking about, though, right? I know. So do I. But really, I got to thinking about his sermon title, "One Tough Mother," and I decided that's about perfect for Mary. She really is one tough mother. And I think that's why she's so universally revered in the Christian tradition, and why people across the generations have put their most fervent petitions to her in their gravest hour of need. It's because she gets what we've been through. You know, in the Gospels, she's never singled out as an example to follow. But if you thread together the few passages we have that refer to her, she stands as a model of faith that you would really hope your children would grow up to become. The leitmotif is developed right up front in the passage that I just read. An angel comes to her with news that she will bear a child. Keep in mind, this is 2,000 years ago. So literally, by today's standards, we would say back then, this is a child having a child. She was a young teenager, probably 13, 14 years old. She had no idea about the wider world. And she certainly had no idea of what she was really getting into. And she has this mysterious greeting that she believes comes from God. The Gospel of Luke does a little bit of psychological exploration of her mindset, which is very unusual because we don't get that in the Bible, since the discipline of psychology wouldn't be invented for another 1,500 years. So we don't have much of that in the writers of the ancient world about what goes on in people's minds. But here we hear this, that she wondered what sort of greeting this might be. Good thing, bad thing, just don't know. But then, in the long history of human experience, I would suppose that this is the most regularly recurring reaction to the news when you hear, "I'm pregnant." It's joy-filled to be sure, but who doesn't immediately stop and wonder silently to themselves, what the hell am I getting myself into, right? You've just opened the door to this huge, life-defining, open-ended quest, the perimeters of which you can't really imagine from here. All of us, when we get that kind of news, wonder secretly to ourselves at least, not so sure. And the life of faith is always like that, is it not? If it were easy, if it were certain, We wouldn't need faith. I remember we got married, I was 22, Kate was 23. Kate was a stunning bride. But I remember going to see her just before the wedding, right literally in the back of the church, just before she was ready to walk down the aisle. Her hands were shaking. Not a real vote of confidence, right? I was not shaking, but I should have been. Looking back, I think like a lot of couples, one of us had enough worry for the both of us, right? And Mary, in her one little line that she has here, has the most eloquent and profound expression of faith that is recorded in Scripture. She says, I'm a follower, I'm a disciple of God. Let it be unto me as you say. By the way, she's quoting Isaiah 6:8. It's a passage where God is looking for somebody to do the right thing, someone who will take the harder, more difficult path. It might unlock the more profound way of being in the world, but it's going to require faith. And it is an aspirational quote, and God has somebody saying, here I am, send me. And God is patiently waiting, by the way, for you, and for you, and for you, to raise your hand and say, here I am, send me, if no one else will go. Let it be unto me, for I am trusting in faith that this is a good thing, that it's going to work out. Because right now, I don't know. And I really can't imagine. I just can't see that far. I'm stepping out in faith. I'm scared as hell. But let's do this. Come what may. It's what we say. And at the most profound junctures of our life, they just come to us like that. We have to act without enough information to really know. We certainly don't have any safety net. There's not any assurances that this is going to be okay. We just have to step out there and trust. And make no mistake, this prayer will return to you many times in your life. I love the story in Luke that's right on this point, because the angels come and tell Mary that her cousin Elizabeth is also pregnant. She gets some confirmation from her cousin, and that, of course, is a blessing. And then at the birth, Mary is visited by this heavenly host. The skies light up with this divine chorus of angels, and shepherds just mysteriously appear out of nowhere to come and bless her baby. And eventually wise men even come from countries afar, as far away as Yemen and Iran, leading a star that follows them to this particular site. There's a whole lot of miraculous confirmation out there. And then they all go, and the story concludes again with this very rare psychological insight into what Mary is thinking. The Gospel of Luke says she pondered all these things in her heart, wondering what they might mean. She had her doubts. You know, faith, real faith, always has its doubts. You're never sure, and yet you are sure. You never really know, even though you do know. This is the human experience. I think Leonardo da Vinci captured this sentiment so well in one of his lesser-known paintings. It's called The Madonna with Child in Spindle. In the background, you can see the beautiful mountains in Tuscany. And Leonardo captures the warm humanity that mothers have with their children, that kind of delight that they share, the warm love that gives new mothers that glow. Baby's playing in her lap. Jesus is playing with one of the most ordinary items in an Italian household in the 1500s, something every kid would pick up every day of the week, probably. It's a spindle. Those spindles are used to spin wool or perhaps thread back in the day when we had to sew all of our clothes, anything that we actually wore. And the baby just happens to be turning that spindle at just the right angle so that at the moment it makes a cross. And the beautiful thing about this painting is that the baby has no idea of what fate holds for him. You can tell from the expression on his face. And Mary has no idea what tragedy awaits her in the future. We never do. We don't know, and we can't be sure. We only have 2 recorded stories about Mary during the youth of Jesus, and both of them suggest that she had to put up with the same parenting issues that all of us have to go through. When Jesus was a young boy, his parents were in the big city of Jerusalem for Passover. Jesus somehow just disappeared out there into the crowd. His parents can't find him. They're frantic. They send out their friends, searching for him everywhere. They finally catch up to him, and he gets that speech, same speech New Yorkers give the world over. You hold my hand on that subway platform, right? Do not run ahead of me. And she gets this line back, I had to be about God's business. Oh, brother. Sounds like my grandsons, One of my kids used to say, you're not the boss of me. Oh, yes, I am. We've all been there with our kids, back and forth on that stuff. And then there's another story. Mary comes looking for Jesus. He's now in his late 20s. He's a young man. He started his movement. He's in his idealist phase. The disciples come to Jesus and they say to Jesus, hey, your mother's here. She wants to talk to you. And Jesus makes this response, and by the way, this response makes it into every single one of the Gospels, suggesting it's one of those stories that has a very solid basis. Jesus says back, his mother's here to see him, well, who is my mother? Here are my mother and my brother and my sisters, those who do the will of God. If you're Mary, spoken like a college sophomore, right? Please, Jesus. We just need to know if you're going to be at the dinner table for the holidays. Is it too much to ask that you let your parents know what your plans are? You just met these people yesterday. We don't actually get Mary's response, and we don't have to. We know what she said. I don't care how woke you are, right? You got a family, right? Every generation is the same. And then Jesus becomes this rock star. I don't know how all of you know this, but so much so that he became part of history. The Roman historians of the time all record stories about Jesus, that large crowds came out to follow him, seeking to be healed. We don't have a response to all that hoopla, all the fame part, the glory days, the salad days. Nobody really remembers much of what Mary was doing during that great run-up. But what we do have is where she was and what she was doing and how she responded when the soft stuff hit the fan. We remember that vividly because all of the Gospels record this part of it. Romans come to arrest Jesus, and that's not good. The religious and political authorities turn against him. And in Mark 14:50, we have those ominous lines, then everyone deserted Jesus. They all fled. We have that character of Peter at the very end of the Gospels. He's kind of the everyman, the would-be disciples. He's all of us, And he pledges to Jesus at the Last Supper, I will never forsake you. And we could presume, that he believed that. But you know how the story goes. By the end of the night, after the threat of physical violence came pretty close to him, he slinks away into the night and denies that he ever knew Jesus, undoubtedly in front of the other disciples, which is how we got it recorded. He was afraid. He folded. He couldn't do it. Sometimes you just shred your integrity because you think that's what you need to do in order to stay alive, and we all hope we won't be that guy. But for those of us who've actually been there, you know how easy it is to fail, how easy it is to cave in moments like that. And in the gospel story about the crucifixion, this fleeing, everybody fled, and it's the symbol of us all breaking faith. We lose hope. We stop trusting in God's goodness. We're afraid, and of course, we're afraid. This is the part of the journey where we have to do some really tough sledding, and almost everybody who opts out does, or who can opt out. Everybody says, I'm done at this point. And in the gospel story, the lens keeps zooming tighter and tighter from the great crowds down to just the disciples, down to just Jesus alone with the authorities, down to just Jesus himself there alone on the cross, utterly alone. And at some point towards the end of the Gospels, we even have Jesus crying out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" He is all alone, except for his mother. We're told that Mary and her cousin and a friend of theirs, those three, they never leave. She never stops being there for him. When no one else will go get that boy in the middle of the night, she goes. She shows up. She never quits. It's the worst night of her life. You have to watch a child suffer. Nothing you can do to stop it. No one should ever have to go through that. And she stays with him until he dies. It's just so sad and so tragic and so full of pathos. Michelangelo captured that sentiment so profoundly in his statue that's in the Vatican. It's aptly called the Pietà, a real form of piety. Mary's like God in that statue a lot. Her lap is actually huge, but you don't notice it. Michelangelo's kind of a genius like that. Her lap is huge. She can hold this entire grown man because God's lap is huge, and God's comfort is huge. God's grace is huge. She holds the tortured, broken body of her adult son in incredible sorrow, but it's almost like she's cradling her baby again. And when you look at this, you'll notice that her face is young. She's the same age as Jesus. It's like she's a young mother again. But isn't it always like that in the midst of tragic death? Mothers just want to hold their children like babies one more time and love them one more time, hoping against hope that somehow their love might bring these kids back. Our Lady, the Queen of Heaven, she's lived through the very worst of our human experience, and she knows our sorrows and our frustrations and how raw we can be. She gets us. At the Church of the Annunciation in Nazareth in Israel, it's built over the childhood home of Jesus. And the Franciscans have invited countries from all over the world to create mosaics that honor Mary. And they line the basilica. And by the way, you can go there and see them for yourself in February 2021, the next time we take a pilgrimage from Christ Church to Jerusalem. And what strikes me when I go there is how universal Mary is in our piety all around the world. We see ourselves in her. At an ecumenical pilgrimage, when you go to Israel and you remember that Americans or Europeans are only a tiny sliver of the whole world, just how many different cultures can see themselves in the mother who cares for us, compassion. This one is donated, a mosaic from Bolivia. Mary there got the most traditional sort of costumes from Bolivian society on there. But you can see how different she looks than we normally see her depicted, say, here in the United States. Or this one from the Philippines. Young Filipino girl receiving the message of she will become pregnant from the angel. Or this one from Ecuador. Again, with the very traditional look that predates Christianity, some of these outfits. It's just interesting. They've kind of blended some of the best of what they had before they became Christians with what they know now. This one from Korea. Again, a very sort of traditional look. But a reminder that we have lots of Christians from the East. And this one from Chile that, interestingly, mirrors something that you see in Irish and in Welsh traditions. There, Mary is not only depicted as a typical Chilean woman with her brunette hair and the baby, and very classical, but her colors that she has mimic the colors that you see in the landscape around Chile. Reminder that the wonderful fecundity of Mary actually also is the same source of power that brings life to all of the world around us. This one from Indonesia, I share this one just for its incredible beauty. Once again, you'll notice that Mary is here adorned with butterflies and all of these other symbols of life, remembering that this is lifting up the life-giving power and grace of God. Or this one from China, again, very traditional, but see how different she is than what we usually say. And of course, this one with more of an African orientation. Or this one from Japan, which again is very traditional sorts of motifs with the flowers and everything that makes for beauty shining forth here and associated with Mary. And then the two from this one from Wales, it's a very typical, I like the one from Ireland and Wales, and the next one's from Ireland, because you have in both of these, you can see how Mary not only is herself a symbol of power, but most importantly, all of the world around us. We use a lot of Celtic imagery at Christ Church, and you'll see this continually. They're always talking about how the heavens and the earth and things under the earth reflect God's glory in our lives. And here you can see all of the different parts of the earth that are associated with her. And then this one from South Africa, and it was done right after the end of apartheid. It's a very interesting image of Mary, not traditional, but actually thinking outside of the box. And here, Mary is like the woman who is speaking of the liberation that she hopes, not only for herself, but obviously also for her people and the whole world that's about to change around her. And that she is the voice that we cry to in our oppression, in our desire to be free. And of course, I have to show you the one that comes from the United States, which again is our Dominican nuns next door. They're typical, these feminist nuns that put these things together in the United States. Mary doesn't need any child in this one to be her own independent self. She is there in all of it. She comes not just in this sort of humble piety, but with a kind of power that might just kick some butt, right? I mean, she's just an incredible force in this. And she brings with her this kind of force of change that might happen in our world. And lastly, I share one which is typical of most of them, particularly in the countries that have been Christian the longest. This one just happens to come from Ukraine. You would see the same thing in Armenia, which is the oldest Christian country, or also Ethiopia. And here, Mary is the patron of things that make our nation unique. Our traditions that are so old, they go way back when. And of course, part of that's because Catholic Christianity is very traditional. But it's also because Mary has guided people across so many generations of prayer and suffering that when we remember her, what we remember is the accumulated piety of previous generations going back and back and back all the way to the founding of our people. Mary is the compassion of God, surrounding us throughout our life cycle, supporting us, calming us when we're afraid, inspiring us, waiting with us patiently as we mature, a kind of comforting presence when we suffer, a way to endure tragedy, and of course, a way to face our own mortality. And that's the divine impulse that we celebrate in Christmas. It's the life force that animates our world. It lived in Mary, but in the Christmas story, it's going to live again also in you. And may you give birth to it in this season of your life. And may that life force fill you mysteriously and miraculously, so that you might also be able to say, "Oh God, I am your humble disciple. Let it be unto me as you say." Amen.